And then I will hand over to David and colleagues. I think, oh, wait, are you starting us off rather than David? Is that right?
Yeah, so David, do you want me to share the slides on my screen?
Please, Owain, yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
Okie dokie, I will do that. So, let's crack on then. The key argument of this study, which is based on some deep ethnography that Dave was doing in a well-known big cosmetics firm, is that we want to enrich understanding of authentic leadership, but mostly as a discourse that has real material effects on lower paid women workers. And we particularly want to show how this discourse of authentic leadership and being authentic is used as a way of sort of extracting and exploiting more from these lower paid women workers. So we're interested in building on understanding of authentic leadership as a sort of everyday discourse and practice, rather than the sort of big formal AL model that's so common in more positive studies of leadership, positivist studies of leadership rather. We're going to be drawing on social reproduction theory, which is a feminist Marxist perspective to help us understand this process, and then we're going to theorize 3 practices from the fieldwork that Dave is going to talk about. Now, most of this has already been said, so by previous presenters, which is fantastic. But let's just say that we're sort of zoning in predominantly on how authentic leadership studies have approached gender, and sort of the research seems to have cohered on this idea that it's harder for women to attain kind of an authentic status in leadership, largely because of bigger social norms such as misogyny, sexism, and so on. So as Helena and colleagues pointed out, who is regarded as authentic is strongly shaped by gender stereotypes and so on. But what we don't have in the literature anywhere near enough, I think, is a kind of everyday experience of how authenticity is experienced in the workplace, and by workers in particular, and how this discourse of authenticity can be put to use in ways that are quite regressive and exploitative, as well as in sort of more positive ways. Because while a lot of us might be critical of this idea of authentic leadership as something measurable and whatnot, there's no doubting that as a sort of everyday discourse in kind of capitalism, trading relations, in organizational relations, it's a very powerful discourse and practice. So in a nutshell, we kind of do need social reproduction theory to help us understand these dynamics. So I'll now pass over to Nela, who will give you a she's going to give you a whistle-stop tour of social reproduction theory. Over to you.
Thanks, Owain. Yes, so just briefly to say that we draw on social reproduction theory in order to demonstrate how women's work is being systematically exploited to generate value for others. And we specifically draw on the work of Silvia Federici and Susan Ferguson. So this theory helps us situate gender within this wider context of capitalist power relations. And specifically, it helps us understand that labor power is something that stems from reproduction. It emerges as a particular set of gendered and sexualized social relations that exist beyond the direct labor capital relation in the so-called private sphere, as Ferguson and McNally defined it. It also helps us understand that labor power is valued differently depending on its location, and that such invisible labor power is crucial for sustaining capitalism. And what I mean by these final 2 points is that which resides outside the waged production in what is often referred to as private sphere is not only devalued, but it is also made invisible. Yet crucially, it is drawn upon as a source of profit making, so it sustains capitalist relations, in other words. And our contribution lies in showing how authentic leadership processes both rely on the social reproduction of gendered norms to extract profit, but also how such reproduction maintains a hierarchy of material reward, with workers reproduced as materially and socially subordinate. And you will learn how that emerges through the data that David generated. Dave, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Nela. Thanks, Owain. So hi, everyone. So as Owain pointed out, this study is based on an ethnographic study I conducted within a pseudonymized cosmetics firm that we name LMA. The eponymous nature of the firm is particularly important to point out at this point, and I'll return to that as I talk you through the data. So yes, it was an ethnographic study. There's myself on the right-hand side having a makeup lesson, and the fieldwork took place for around 9 months across London. So thanks, Owain. If we pop straight to the next slide. Am I doing the next slide? Sorry. Okay, so thanks. Yeah, so this is the first of the 3 practices that Owain mentioned, the way that this kind of discourse of authenticity materializes. So we've labeled this and badged it as authentic tyranny. And essentially, I want to talk you through the data and explain this practice. But in essence, it's how this discourse of authenticity manifests within this practice from kind of a corporate top-down perspectives and filters through the firm. And as Owain said, it has consequences on the kind of the ground level of practice, the ground level of interaction for the makeup artists concerned. And so a key way that this happens, and as I'll explain now through the data, is through management control that is constantly monitored, is constantly surveilled in terms of the fact that this authenticity of the eponymous leader manifests on a daily basis as artists interact with their clients. So thanks, Owain. So if we look now on the screen, this is from a managerial PowerPoint that is presented at the start of all staff workshops and presentations that I attended. And here, as I said before, the eponymous aspect is particularly important because in essence, what the firm is doing is saying that the eller maze, or as we see at the top, the kind of the purpose and promise on the brand pyramid, to be your best, most authentic self, but then kind of paradoxically only prettier and more confident, how that trickles down and manifests through the firm. And so if we look there, the red arrows, if we look towards the blue arrow at the bottom of the screen, eller may, the person, the leader, underpins all of this. So one and all, the firm and the person, their authenticity is one and the same thing in essence. And on the left-hand side, the green arrow, I wanted to briefly point out that one of the key ways that this happens is within Ella's makeup lessons. So this is a key vehicle for the firm to drive through this authenticity discourse, this authenticity philosophy, to generate income, of course, but also to exploit the predominantly women workers who make up the employment demographic within the firm. So thanks, Owain. So here, as I mentioned before, a kind of top-down control through what the firm called kind of mystery shop, which is where kind of managers and their kind of surrogate, mystery shoppers who are supposedly unknown to the artists visit the firm. And what artists are expected to do is to verbalize to clients within the makeup lessons this philosophy, this discourse of authenticity that we saw on the brand pillars page. And unfortunately for this artist, she fell down on this one requirement. So we can see that Ella's philosophy and ethos, unfortunately, this artist did not verbalize it to the extent that the firm required of her, and she lost points. So the 90% there, it wasn't 100%. She in the eyes of the firm, she failed. And so this is one way that the firm insists upon and mandates that the philosophy cascades its way down through the firm. So thanks, Owain. And so so there we see a bit of an aftermath from the from this failure. I put in failure in quotes. So here we're kind of coming up with, this is a mid. Sorry, Nela, have you made a? Okay, so this is the aftermath. So here, mid managers are coming up with some strategies about how they're going to kind of get around this and what's going to happen from here on in. So no mention of Ella. How are we going to do this? Well, one way is to verbalize one Ella theory, and then within breakfast meetings, then to follow up on the counter. Another colleague comes in and says, well, actually, a more thank you, Marianne. So to mention Ella 3 times in their makeup lesson. So what we see in essence here, and I can talk more through in the Q&A, is how this kind of materializes. So the next one, moving quickly on to authentic upward distribution. So we could argue that the first practice around exploiting women workers in terms of maybe their view of what the client in front of them should have in terms of femininity, arguably, or their own specific judgment. Here with upward distribution, what we're talking about is how women workers, the cosmetic workers, are exploited materially a bit more, and how it hits them in the pocket as such. So one of the ways is through that they must dress their faces within a certain in a certain way and kind of badge themselves as their leader wants them to. But we're going to focus on the data that I'm going to present now about how that manifests in makeup lessons through free labour. So thanks, Owain. So here, this slide is again presented within workshops, training workshops, but also available to clients on counter. And we can see here, I'd like to draw your attention to these makeup lessons. They range from 10 minutes to an hour, but the firm markets them and distributes them as they're free, they're complimentary, they're our treat. So in essence, what is happening is that workers are expected and they're mandated and they're targeted on doing these lessons. They have to do them, and they can spend up to an hour with the client, but there is no guarantee that the client will actually buy anything. So it hits the workers materially in the pocket, because the workers depend on this basically to subsidize their low-level basic wages. And so here an artist is reflecting in an interview about the kind of the injustice of this. It's not fair that we don't charge. We get shouted at. The firm and managers make us devalue ourselves, but there's nothing that they can say. They're powerless in essence, because this discourse of authenticity is being driven through the firm, and they have to materialize it and to make it happen within the lessons. So that's the second of the three practices. And then very quickly moving on to the final one. This practice kind of falls a little bit more outside of the makeup lessons, but in essence, another aspect of the founder's authenticity is her authentic lifestyle. It doesn't just incorporate outer beauty, kind of the manifestly kind of skin beauty, if you want to call it that. It kind of goes from within, so kind of a core in that staff are expected to and mandated on consuming certain goods, certain foods and certain foodstuffs and drink within internal staff spaces like meetings and workshops. But they're also instructed to capture this on social media and to distribute it internally on the private group and externally as well. So again, I'm going to just go to the data now, please, Owen. So yeah, so we see here, this is an edict sent down, top down corporate above again. Dues, you must follow the Eller's natural eating philosophy, but you can't have non-Eller approved food at the meetings, such as such illicit goods as pastries, chocolates, etc. So, and the photographs there are, they give some indication of the kind of these kind of fruits and berries artists are expected to consume and to buy, but they are often more expensive than perhaps workers can necessarily afford out of their own pockets once other factors have been taken into consideration. So if you move to the next slide, this really hammers home, I think, an interview with an artist. It's talking about a head office corporate event. And yeah, I mean, what can I say? If we look at it in the emboldened parts, this artist had to take a cookie from a rival firm's table because the food on offer from LMA wasn't nourishing enough and didn't give her, thanks Marianne, give her enough energy to get through the training process. And is her manager going to sack me if she's found with this illicit cookie in her bag? So this is a common thread amongst artists, this fear again of being surveilled in terms of not carrying on and reproducing, if you like, the author's the founder's authenticity philosophy through the food that they digest and consume. And some workers, some of her colleagues didn't even get fed at that workshop at the head office. So again, practice one perhaps exploits women workers in terms of their kind of autonomy in the workplace. Practice two is more around hitting them materially in terms of their pockets, and then here we see in terms of it actually has an impact on their daily practice, and in terms of having the kind of the strength, if you like, and the nourishment that we all need to kind of get through the working day. So thanks everyone. That was a whistle stop tour. And I think we'll now, we've got the references that can be made available afterwards, of course. But yeah, we'd welcome some questions. Thanks.
Can I just say, I think that's horrendous. All of that in the name of authenticity. I'm completely gobsmacked by that. I don't know about anybody else. Has anybody got any questions? I'm sure there must be questions after that. That's doing my head in.
I think we were gobsmacked as well. We
Yeah.
had no interest in writing about authentic leadership until Dave started sharing all this detail. We were like, yeah, I got to write about that.
I mean, it's the most inauthentic thing in the name of authenticity I've ever heard of. It's unbelievable. Jackie, yes, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much for a fascinating presentation. I love the idea of of combining a feminist and Marxist critique. A very powerful lens, and I think hitherto underexplored. So I think it's something that's really significant. I'm slightly struck about the notion of, well, not about the notion of authenticity, but about the notion of authentic leadership, and which seems to disappear a little in the discussion. I wonder, it's almost like these people are expected to be authentic followers rather than authentic leaders. That the leader direction is coming from Ella. But the exploited are kind of suffering at the hands of such an exploitative set of practices. I don't know whether this notion of because authentic leader and authentic leadership, I think you mentioned a few times. I just wonder. Well, I don't know where this thought's going, but it struck me that it's rather than necessarily being about authentic leadership, it was even more pervasive than that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think my impression of it is kind of workers paying for literally out of their own pockets and missing out on sales, but in other ways too. This attempt to live up to the image of LMA as a leader. So I guess that in our sense, there's not very much leadership practice going on at all, but there's a lot of this kind of trying to reflect the image and person of LMA. That's for sure. And I mean, Nela, you've got more to say about how that's a particular take on femininity as well, haven't you? This kind of natural, this is the real woman.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the objectifying woman, this image of what woman should be if a woman wanted to be authentic. That's pretty much in feminist waters. I just wanted to add, in terms of leadership, followership that Jackie Ford outlined. I think it's a really, really important kind of to explore that dynamic between the two, because these makeup artists, as they call them, even though they are kind of barred from expressing any kind of creativity, these kind of artists are supposed to be also to take on the leadership role in kind of promoting this image of authenticity. So yes, in a sense, they are following LMA's diktat, but on the other hand, they are also kind of almost forced into a particular type of leadership, to enforce this idea. So it is all pushed, through their campaign and marketing as such. So it is a really kind of tricky bit. They're not followers in the classical sense of the theoretical sense, but not also leaders. The company would want to present them as, I guess, leaders of authenticity.
It's a contradiction, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a contradiction, and perhaps even a paradox. Now that I started developing this idea at the back of what Jackie said, I'm thinking maybe it's a paradox even. Yeah. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jack. I think it's important as well to say kind of an interesting aspect of the data is in perhaps the setup is that we didn't include today because we don't have the time, unfortunately, is a lot of artists were attracted to working for the firm because of Ella May. They saw her as an authentic figurehead, an authentic leader that was absent from other cosmetic firms, you know, that were seen as these kind of corporate kind of behemoths, whereas Ella was kind of presented as this kind of working mom, and you know, she's kind of, you know, kind of one of us, yet kind of a multi-millionaire at the same time. So it's kind of, it's, you know, it's a bit of a contradiction in terms for workers who are, you know, kind of being paid low level wages. So I think that's perhaps a conversation there, you know, myself and Owain, Nela and Alex can have at a later date about kind of maybe whether we should make a play of that within the paper as well. And so, yeah, thanks, Jackie.
It struck me again, you had specifically said that you were getting away from the authentic leadership construct, and yet you seem to be irrevocably or not ineluctably drawn back to the kind of prescriptive functionalist elements of that construct by your data. It seems if you couldn't actually escape that, which I thought was very interesting. I've just seen we've got a comment here from Tingyan. This discussion makes me think there might be other components in leadership other than leader, follower and context. Yes, I think that's definitely true. I don't know if you want to comment on that, any of you.
Can you just repeat that last question? Oh, it's
Sorry,
in the chat, is it? Let me pull
it's
it
in
up.
the chat. This discussion makes me think there might be other components in leadership other than leader, follower and context.
Yeah, I mean, well, capitalist relations, right? And I think maybe that's, I'm going to get edgy now, why not? I think maybe that's the reason why I keep getting pulled back. Maybe we can't escape the authentic leadership construct, right? Which is that this construct, as you beautifully pointed out, Marion, in your own writing, was developed in a context of a crisis of capitalism around corporate scandals and whatever, and this was capitalism's answer to capitalism's crisis. So maybe it's no surprise that, you know, if capitalism's answer to capitalist problems is more capitalism, but, you know, whatever, a slightly different version of it, that we keep going round and round in these kind of circular, you know, logics of extraction, exploitation, crisis, more extraction, exploitation, crisis, and so on. That's just my reading, but
interesting.
Yeah.
I can see Navina's got her hand up. Navina.
Hi, thank you. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed your presentation. I also want to look at gender a bit more in future in my own research. I just wondered about that connection between injustice and authenticity. You had a slide up with some really interesting data, and you were talking about that connection, that really interesting connection between injustice and authenticity. I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that, please.
Was that when we were reviewing the literature, Navina?
No, that was the data. I think that was a participant sort of view of was talking about like injustice of going through. I think it was just. Yeah, I think. Yes, yeah. I think so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I think the key point here is, you know, because they're spending so long doing this authentic performance via the makeup lesson, which is about developing this authentic connection with customers, what's actually happening at that point in time is they're losing money. So you've got workers on a very low wage who get extra money from commission. But if they're spending a lot of time building these authentic customer relations, they're not making commission. So essentially, they're the ones paying for, you know, this corporate leader living out her true authentic self, is the case in point here.
And if I could just add that authentic leader of LMA, she's really leaning so heavily into this image of, you know, like a regular mom, regular, you know, woman who is spending most of her time in what we often refer to as private sphere, and yet kind of flourishing and being successful at everything and accomplishing everything, you know, herself and through her own imagination and ingenuity. And yet, you know, there's this hidden kind of sweatshop of little workers that kind of work to sustain that kind of image of authenticity, and that line her pockets in the end, and all these things that they've mentioned through his data, forcing these people to kind of nibble on these, I don't even know, those fashionable goji berries and stuff like that, because that's how you reach your authenticity. And yes, you feel faint because you're so hungry and you work long hours and you have to sneak out to eat Greg's sausage roll because you're afraid you're going to pass out from authenticity. It's just so grim, so bleak. And very gendered.
Sorry, can I ask how LMA defines authenticity such that it is so clearly on the surface? Well, I mean, obviously the food is internal, but it's clearly not about being who you are. It's about being something else. So how do they define authenticity in a way that squares that circle?
Dave, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think. Well, to be honest, Marianne, it's weird. I mean, it's so one of their mantras, one of their ethoses and philosophies, I suppose, is all women are pretty, but with the right makeup, they can be pretty powerful. Or be more confident. So you're already confident, but if you buy our products and you have our service applied onto you, you can be even more confident. So it's it's an inherently unnatural process to have kind of 10 different varieties of products applied onto one's face and then be told that yes, you're already pretty, but you can be even more so. So
it's quite toxic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely, and we didn't have chance today, unfortunately, but it is mandatory that artists apply makeup onto their faces in the same kind of stepwise process that they have to onto clients, yet they're not provided with the products to do so. They have to buy them out of their own pocket. So I think a question for us is which of the practices do we kind of foreground, and perhaps I think they're all interesting to a degree, but there's perhaps some that are shouting a bit louder than others, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. I can see we've got another question now from Shubhashini. I'm sorry, I hope I'm getting that right. Shubhashini.
Hi, it's Subhashini. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.
A very interesting research and presentation. But just commenting on what you just mentioned, David, by having this LMA claim that makeup makes you powerful, right? Isn't this, I mean, I don't find this to be very authentic, because through her leadership, she is perpetuating an age-old gender stereotype that women, to be perceived as powerful, they need to dress in a particular way, they need to style themselves in a particular way, and unless you wear makeup, you're never going to be powerful, similar to unless you're wearing high heels. And in my research, this was one of the things, the way my participants described authenticity, is to move away from that. In fact, one of the questions I'd asked my participants was, what would you advise a 25-year-old young woman who enters corporate? What advice would you give to them? And off the hat, the woman just replied, makeup does not define you. Your clothes do not define you. And that the sooner you learn that, the faster you learn that, the better leader you're going to be. So when I listen to what you're saying, and again, coming back to the relationship between authenticity, I mean, your part is LMA, right? If I got that right,
yeah.
Puts on this mask that I run a business, I have a family, I balance both. But behind the scenes, she's not really ethical or authentic, because if we really look at authenticity, it's actually, from my understanding, it is being who you are, and then your actions and behaviors have to reflect that. So with the sweatshop kind of business that she runs and promoting makeup as something that makes you powerful, I find that to be very inauthentic. I mean, those are just my thoughts, so sorry. But very interesting presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a contradiction in terms. I mean, another kind of philosophy is, kind of similar to Nike, just do it. It's kind of like be who you are, which again is it's another kind of philosophy that kind of didn't kind of fall within the brand pyramid that we presented at the start, but it is nevertheless kind of chimes with the kind of the deeply kind of ironic, I suppose, practice that runs through the whole firm, like I said, from kind of the kind of New York headquarters down to its kind of subsidiaries, and onto the shop floor. Sorry, Nela, I don't know if you were.
Oh, well, I also wanted just to agree to say that Subhashini, you're absolutely right. She's kind of spouting such stereotypes, and under the banner of authenticity. But that's exactly the point. She's very exploitative in her practice, so she hides behind the screen of authenticity in order to exploit others. And this authenticity, she tried to mask it in more than makeup. Yes, she is selling makeup, but she's also kind of she's plugging into all those kind of feelings that we all have, like be your true self, express your creativity, be free, be powerful. We all want to be free and powerful, and heard, and to have space to be creative and all that. So she's tapping into those human vulnerabilities and presents them as authenticity, but unfortunately there's a very dark side to it, as Dave has shown through his data, which, however, whichever perspective, whichever angle you approach it, there's a very dark exploitation behind it. And she can wrap it up in looking beautiful and being creative and being pretty and powerful and healthy and knowing what you want, but
Thank you.
It's to us it's obvious that it's not. Yeah,
we've got about 30 seconds to wrap up, Owain, if you want to come in with a final comment.
I was just going to say, as we're being recorded, I thought I would just make it clear that we're absolutely not saying that this was run like a sweatshop. There were lots of workers who bought into this image, who it was a mix of responses, in fairness, wasn't it, Dave? And some feeling more exploitive than others. And also, I think it's important to say that one dynamic I think we might look at a bit more is the degree of control that LMA in reality had over this process, and how much of it was kind of beyond her control, and just part of the bigger kind of corporate churn, while agreeing with everything that Nela and others have just said. Just wanted to
Okay.
make that clear.
That was dramatic.
Yeah.
Dramatic exaggeration of my part.
It wasn't an exaggeration. I just thought it was worth
I think we're all kind of heading in the same direction on this one, but thank you for the note of caution. Thank you to all three of our presenters. We've had three very different but very interesting papers there. I look forward to seeing the full papers in due course. Thank you also to the folks asking questions. We've had some very good questions. It's a shame we can't have the kind of conversation we'd have if we were face to face, but I think we've done a very, very good next best thing. So thank you very much, everybody. Lovely to see you all, and see you in the next session, I hope. Thank you. Bye-bye.